So Tuscan leather is one of Tom Ford's most popular fragrances. In fact, it's so popular for them, they created another fragrance that smells sort of similar to it, Ombre leather. But you know what? Since it's so popular, there are so many fragrances that smell like Tuscan leather. So in this video, I'm going to give you alternatives to Tuscan leather. There are fragrances that remind me of Tuscan leather. There's 12 total in the main video. And then after the outro, in the bonus section, we've got additional fragrances that are more alternatives that don't smell very similar to Tuscan leather. So if you want to find out about alternatives to Tuscan leather, then please stay tuned. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian, and yes, today I'm talking about alternatives to Tuscan leather. Are you a fan of Tuscan leather? Have you gotten your nose on it? Do you find an alternative for it? Do you enjoy this leather smell, kind of like industrial, very oily, greasy, with some fruits thrown in, and of course an overdose of leather? Is this your favorite kind of fragrance? As I said, it is a very popular fragrance for Tom Ford. That's why they created an alternative to it themselves called Ombre leather. Ombre leather first launched in the private blend collection, then they moved it into the signature line, so kind of competes with Tuscan leather. But Tuscan leather also had a flanker later part of the 2010s called Tuscan Leather Intense, whereas it reminds you of the original Tuscan Leather, but Tuscan Leather Intense went into more of a green, almost boozy, like licorice anise direction. Really great fragrance. I really enjoy that one. Even though it's an Intense, it's still an eau de parfum concentration, but they price it higher, unfortunately. That's discontinued. I won't talk about that in this video. I just wanted to mention it. But we are talking about alternatives to Tuscan leather, a very popular Tom Ford fragrance. But before we get started with the list, let me know if you're a fan of this particular fragrance, and if you enjoy leather fragrances, this particular kind of leather fragrance. There's a lot of alternatives out there. I've got 12 here. There are a few budget ones thrown in as well. But we're going to get started with a fragrance from the house of JUSBOX called Night Flow. This one right here. This is a leather accord with saffron and also raspberry, pink pepper, and Davana. So Tuscan leather has that raspberry note. It's very popular, and you can see that in a lot of different fragrances. You've probably gotten your nose on this particular signature of leather and fruity raspberry, and it's prominent here. But you know what I like with this one? It's a bit more Davana, which is kind of green and boozy and licoricey a little bit. So it kind of goes into more of a direction of reminding me a little bit of Tuscan Leather Intense, in that it has the fruitiness, and of course it's got the leather, the saffron, but it does tend to remind me a little, give me a hint of that Tuscan Leather Intense, which had that kind of licoricey, kind of green, boozy anise note that I really enjoyed with that particular version. So if you haven't gotten your nose on JUSBOX's Night Flow, you should definitely get your nose on it. In fact, I've got a second fragrance from the house that's in the alternatives section after the bonus, in the bonus section. But this is a great alternative to Tom Ford's Tuscan leather, which kind of very much reminds you of Tuscan leather, but you've got a little bit of a difference with that Davana note in here. Are you familiar with the Davana note? Let me know if you're a fan of it, but definitely check this one out if you're a fan of Tuscan leather. I think it's a great alternative to Tuscan leather. But moving on to the house of Parfums de Marly, we've got GODOLPHIN here. GODOLPHIN was probably the very first Tuscan leather alternative I got my nose on, and it's definitely very much like Tuscan leather. It could even be a flat out dupe, copying Tuscan leather from Tom Ford, but it is pretty intense. I feel like it is definitely more intense than the original Tuscan leather. It's beefier. But in the end, you're dealing with leather here, lots of saffron, which are kind of key ingredients or notes in the original Tuscan leather. But you've got musk here, amber, vetiver, vanilla, thyme, cypress, and jasmine. So some sweet touches, lots of woods, a bit spicy aromatics in there, and then you've got some light floral touches. And I should say that the jasmine does come up in a lot of the Tuscan leather alternatives. In fact, I believe it's in the original Tuscan leather as well, so there's a bit of a floral touch in there. But for me, the jasmine is not super potent because the leather definitely covers it up. So this is a great alternative to Tuscan leather. It's GODOLPHIN. But you know, there's so many fragrances that remind me of Tuscan leather, with like especially this next one from the house of DIPTYQUE. It's RIHLA, this one right here. So as soon as I smelled this one, it reminded me of Tuscan leather because it's that very, very signature style that Tom Ford created in the mid 2000s. But you know what? Once again, it's so robust here with this version. Very thick and beefy, the way I like it, because Tuscan leather to me seems a bit more industrial. This one has this kind of like soft edges and definitely very well rounded and balanced, but you can feel the oomph, the kind of like the intensity of the fragrance. It has a very robust quality about it, but it's leather with pink pepper, atlas, cedar, iris, vanilla, saffron, and raspberry. As you can hear the notes, very similar to the original Tuscan leather, and it's that signature, the leather, the saffron, and then also the raspberry that's given me this kind of a, you know, quality or reminder of Tuscan leather. It is a great fragrance. I feel like Tuscan leather to me is a bit animalic, but not so much. Very greasy and a bit fruity, whereas it's an overdose of the leather, which I quite like. It's super sexy. And here, this is a great, great alternative in diptyque style, created by Fabrice Pellegrin, I believe. This is RIHLA from Diptyque. Check it out. Now, we've got a fragrance from the house of Goldfield and Banks. It's called Purple Suede. Now, this one, to me, for sure reminds me of Tuscan leather, but it goes into a different direction. There's a lot of lavender in here, and the color of this lavender colored label is the color I see with this fragrance because of that overdose of lavender. It reminds me of walking through perhaps the combination of the south of France and also Tuscany, where there's a leather trade. So you've got the essence of the lavender and also the essence of the leather combined together. Because for me, I've gone to the south of France quite a bit, and I could smell the lavender in the markets. And of course, if you go to the leather industry in Tuscany, which a lot of leather was being tanned over there, you got that smell of the leather, and an animalic smell. Here, it's basically the combination. It's a great, great take on Tuscan leather, I feel like. But in this fragrance, they have suede, lavender, there's oud, cashmeran, civet, patchouli, amber oak moss, coriander, and pink pepper. Wonderful, wonderful offering from the house of Goldfield and Banks. It's purple suede. Definitely, the name is perfect. The suede is kind of buttery, rich, supple, and not very animalic. Even though they have civet listed here, it doesn't really get fully animalic. So check that out, purple suede. All right, next up, going to the house of Atelier Materi. It's CUIR NILAM. CUIR NILAM. I have a hard time saying this word in French. It's not queer, but it's a variation on that word. But I'm doing my best. And this is actually a really, really great take on something that reminds me of Tuscan leather. They've got an overdose of violet leaves here, so there's a freshness about it. Now, Tom Ford did Ombre leather parfum, and they added, you know, the violet leaves in it. For me, it doesn't really work, but for me, with Atelier Materi's CUIR NILAM, it's super, super sexy. Really, really wonderful offering. So you've got the leather in here that reminds me of Tuscan leather, but in here you've also got tobacco, patchouli, cardamom, rose, and then also the violet leaves. It's a great, very, very sexy combination. Very sexy leather. The patchouli has that earthiness. The tobacco has its kind of dirty ashiness. Cardamom with its pungent, soapy spice. And then, of course, the floral touches, light floral touches of the rose. And you've got a lot of ozonic violet leaves, giving it a fresh air throughout the whole combination of notes. Really great. CUIR NILAM is a great, great take on Tuscan leather, something that I really enjoy. Then I'm going to talk to you about Ombre leather, of course. Also Ombre leather parfum. A great alternative to Tuscan leather, I think. As I said earlier, there's a reason why Tom Ford copied themselves. They created a less expensive version of Tuscan leather. Although Ombre leather was in the private blend collection, it was there for a year, it got shelved, and then like a year later, they got moved into the signature line, and it's been a hit for Tom Ford quite a bit. That is the reason why they've created the parfum. But for me, I would just skip the parfum, go right to CUIR NILAM from Atelier Materi. It's kind of the similar idea with violet leaves, and it's a better version with the CUIR NILAM. But for me, I feel like Ombre Leather is a really, really great leather fragrance in the designer world. And it's also not private blend where it's going to cost you an arm and a leg. It's definitely less expensive, plus it's available at the discounters. But Cardamom, Jasmine, Sambac, Black Leather, Patchouli, White Moss, and Amber are the notes for Ombre Leather. Created by Sonia Constant, I feel like she did a great job. Although, did Tom Ford copy themselves with Tuscan Leather? I don't think they're identical, but they're definitely close. They remind me of one another. The other thing I should say with Ombre Leather is there's definitely more of a fabric leather smell, whereas with Tuscan Leather, it's more leather and a bit animalic as well. So that's Tom Ford's Ombre Leather. Check it out if you don't know it. But we have a fragrance from the house of BYREDO. It's Black Saffron, this one right here. And this one, again, it's a fruitier take on the leather, I think. And BYREDO does not necessarily very dense, heavy fragrances. So if you like the idea of Tuscan Leather, it felt thick and heavy for you, very dense and more leather than fruits. This to me is a fruitier take on something like Tuscan Leather and also a bit easier to wear. It's leather, saffron, raspberries, black violet, blonde woods, juniper berries, vetiver, and pomelo. The pomelo adds this kind of zing and freshness to the fragrance, but it's not very strong. And then the violet in here is that trademark violet that's in a lot of BYREDO fragrances. It's totally there. I mean, I'm smelling leather here. I'm smelling definitely the raspberry, and then the saffron, and for sure lots of violet. And violet, as I said, it's very trademark for the house of BYREDO. And again, this is a really great take on Tuscan Leather, a fruitier, as I said, and also fresher. But again, if you don't like that, skip this one. But if you like the idea of something fresher in the leather world that's reminding you of Tuscan Leather, check out Black Saffron from BYREDO. All right, next up, going to the house of Nichane. It's Suede at Saffron, this one right here. So once again, we've got something similar to Tuscan Leather, but we've got a bit less fruitiness and more muskiness in here with a bit of a zing from ginger that's added in here. So the leather suede saffron combo will remind you of the Tuscan Leather fragrance. And to me, this is more close to Tuscan Leather than it is to Ombre Leather. There's a bit of an animalic quality about this one, but then you have ginger here, that kind of fresh, spicy zing, musk and ambrette seeds, which I love the ambrette seeds in here. So ambrette seeds creates a powdery musk to the fragrance. And even though there's no mention of raspberry, I'm getting faint raspberry in here. It could also be the a chord created with different notes combined together. But Suede at Saffron, it's a bit more savory than sweet, because it has sweetness in there. But for me, when I'm comparing it to other, especially the BYREDO, there's a bit more of a savory edge with it, not necessarily very sweet and inviting, if that makes sense. So it's a bit more rough and a bit more closer to Tuscan Leather. But it's a really, really great fragrance from the house of Nichane. Probably very underrated as well. It's not one of the fragrances from Nichane that a lot of people speak about, but definitely something that you should check out. So Suede at Saffron from the house of Nichane is definitely a fragrance you should check out. Moving on to the house of Tiziana Terenzi, it's Sienne, this one right here. So this one, once again, not necessarily very sweet and fruity. It's a bit more woody, but it's very leathery, and then of course the slight bit animalic in here as well. So Tiziana Terenzi has given us a kind of a version of Tuscan Leather with a lot of cypress notes in here. There's cypress with the leather, there's incense, juniper, myrrh, iris, honey, patchouli, amber, sandalwood, and musk. And there is sweetness here. I'm not saying there's not much sweetness, but for me this is in line with the Suede at Saffron, but a more woodier take on that. It is sweetened up with the honey, but of course you've got amber, musk in here, and lots of woods. It does get powdery as well, but you know, the note of cypress comes in, and it gives you that kind of aromatic, woody greenness that cypress note has. And so it's a very unique take on something that smells like Tuscan Leather, and a very intense fragrance here. Terenzi's fragrances are very, very intense and definitely something that lasts a long time. So if you like the idea of Tuscan Leather with a Terenzi touch, definitely check out Sienne from the house of Tiziana Terenzi. So we've got a couple of budget fragrances next, and then we'll be done with the main list. We're going to the house of Rasasi. It's Layaquam Om, this one right here. I'm probably butchering that name. Layaquam. Anyway, it's Ombre. Then this is basically, most people consider this a clone of Tuscan leather. It does remind me of Tuscan leather for sure. And it's the combination of leather, suede, raspberry. There's woods in here, amber, olibanum, jasmine, artemisia, saffron, and thyme. So all of the signature notes are in here that are mostly in Tuscan leather, but we've got something a little more budget here that's affordable for people to, you know, have access to smell like Tuscan leather, but not pay the price of Tuscan leather. So to me, it's very, very close, maybe a bit more woody, slight bit powdery in comparison to Tuscan leather. But I think if you are looking for an alternative that's less expensive, for sure try Layaquam from the House of Rasasi, and that is Layaquam Ombre. I believe there's a femme as well. And then the last but not least, something very, very inexpensive. In fact, I featured this in an inexpensive fragrances video last week. This is Ben Sherman's signature right here. A 50 ml for around 20 bucks. And you're gonna smell like a cross between Tuscan leather and Ombre leather. In fact, the bottle looks a bit like Ombre leather, a little bit, right? Look, here. A little bit. Anyway, this is a really great take on Ombre leather, Tuscan leather, and it's very inexpensive. So those of you that are doing budget fragrances, inexpensive or cheap fragrances, you've got to check this one out, especially if you've been looking for a fragrance that reminds you of Tuscan leather or Ombre leather. This is notes of leather, violet leaves, patchouli, amber, woods, jasmine, cardamom, ozonic notes, and oud. I featured this in a cheap or budget fragrances video last week, as I said. For me, it's definitely very much so in line with something that reminds me of Tuscan leather and Ombre leather, but for me, it's got the ozonic notes, and I feel like the amber creates a bit of a, like a soft, something sweet and soft that's against the leathery notes that's in here. There's for sure violet leaves, which is prominent in a lot of other fragrances that remind me of Tuscan leather. The violet leaves gives you that ozonic, fresh, watery touch. And I think it's the combination of that and the amber that gives you this kind of like creamy consistency against the leather and the ozonic notes. It's a really great fragrance for very, very inexpensive price. It's Ben Sherman's signature, a fragrance that reminds me of Tuscan leather / Ombre leather. So anyway, those are my thoughts on these alternatives to Tuscan leather. Let me know if you're a fan of Tuscan leather. Do you have a bottle? It's been in the private blend collection since like 2007, I believe. So the mid 2000s, and it's been popular. It's one of the first 4 or 5 very like popular private blend collection fragrances like oud wood, tobacco vanille, Tuscan leather. Then there was also Noir de Noir. Maybe there might be another, but the first 4 or 5 that haven't been discontinued have been, you know, clinging on to the world of Tom Ford private blend. But yeah, a lot of people enjoy it and a lot of people don't, and that's why we have alternatives. And if you are looking for an alternative, definitely check out some of the fragrances I discuss here for you today. Do let me know also if there's another alternative that you are aware of, that you use, that I could find out about, because this is all I have here in the studio, but I'd like to find out if there are any others that might be even better than what I'm speaking about today. But either way, guys, thanks so much for watching today's video. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye, and don't forget, we've got bonus options coming right up. So all of the fragrances that I spoke about so far do remind me of Tuscan leather, and they have that DNA that reminds me of the main fragrance Tuscan leather. But I've got 5 fragrances here that are leather fragrances, but they're not really smelling like Tuscan leather. That DNA with the leather, saffron, and raspberry combo. Here I'm going to talk to you about DS & Durga's Leather Eyes. For something that's really, really authentic smelling leather, smells like a leather store, a leather shoe repair store, something like that, where, you know, there's leather material and things like that. It really does smell like authentic leather, but it's from the house of DS & Durga. It's a fragrance / enhancer, as you can see on there, featuring notes of butterscotch leather, cistus, cubeb, pale orris, cypriol, saffron, vegan castoreum, myrrh, and cade oil. So if you compare this to Tuscan leather, they're not going to smell alike. They're so different. But I wanted to give you an option that's completely different and another leather fragrance kind of a thing. Moving on to the house of JUSBOX once again. It's Black Powder, this one right here. Fragrance created by Julienne Rasquinet. In fact, both of the suggestions I mentioned today are created by Julienne Rasquinet for JUSBOX. But they're so different. To me, they're both leathers, but Black Powder smells a bit different. Actually, I shouldn't say a bit different. It smells different and doesn't remind me of Tuscan leather. In the end, it's suede, tobacco, apple, blackcurrant, frankincense, and tonka beans. It's a great leather fragrance, and it definitely has the signature touch of Julienne Rasquinet. So it's the suede leather, so it's a softer, not necessarily harsh leather, animalic kind of a thing. This is not animalic. Against the tobacco, you've also got apple for its fruitiness, and I like this fruity combo of apple and blackcurrant against the suede and the tobacco. So the frankincense throws in some smokiness as well, and a really great leather fragrance that I had forgotten about, but I wanted to highlight here as an alternative that doesn't smell like Tuscan leather, but it is definitely an alternative. This one's inspired by the music of Nirvana, grunge music. We've got a fragrance called Deep Leather from the house of Angel Schlesser. This one right here, a budget fragrance for around 40 bucks, no, 50 bucks, somewhere around there. And a fragrance created by Hamid Muradi Kashani. And basically, it's leather, bergamot, and vanilla. And once again, with this leather, I get more of a suede leather quality here. And it's also a bit sweet because it's got that vanilla. So there's a kind of a gourmand edge to it. I feel like there's also a little bit of saffron in here and some maybe light aromatics and some ambery touches and woods thrown in here as well. There's definitely a bit of a Middle Eastern edge with this leather, but it's a pretty good quality leather fragrance for not very expensive. It doesn't smell like Tuscan leather to me, but it's another leather fragrance that I wanted to highlight, a less expensive one. If you're tired of that whole Tuscan leather DNA, you want something different, you can go with something like these in this bonus section. So this is Angel Schlesser Deep Leather. Two more fragrances, and the next one I'm talking about is from the house of Maître Parfumeur Gantier. It's CUIR Fetiche, this one right here. I should highlight the name right there. This, to me, if you ever got your nose on the vaulted Creed fragrance called Royal English Leather, you're going to love this one, because it reminds me of that. It's got this kind of classic edge to it. It's a bit animalic. It's leather for sure, but it's loads of iris, amber, musk, geranium, jasmine, sandalwood, patchouli, ylang ylang, vanilla, rose, and bergamot. But if you know this fragrance called Canise 10, it's a Swiss brand, very famous for their two leather fragrances. Canise 10, and then there's Canise 10 Golden Edition. In fact, there might be more than two editions. This does remind me of that as well. And a little bit of Cuir Canage and a little bit of Misia from Chanel. But there's this kind of a vintage vibe here, a bit animalic, and really a great reminder of the vaulted Creed fragrance, Royal English Leather. I absolutely really love Royal English Leather. This definitely kind of lives up to reminding me of that fragrance. So it's a different leather, totally not smelling like Tuscan leather, but a great alternative. So this is CUIR Fetiche from the house of Maître Parfumeur Gantier. And last but not least, we're going to the house of Amouage. It's Opus 7 Reckless Leather. So totally different leather once again. It won't remind you of Tuscan leather, but it's a different take on leather with leather here, cypriol, fenugreek, galbanum, cardamom, oud, ambergris, olibanum, pink pepper, nutmeg, patchouli, and costus. There's a greenness running throughout it and some spiciness with the fenugreek. The galbanum adds the greenness. It does get a bit animalic, but it's not overly animalic for sure. In fact, I turned on to this fragrance to my barber, the guy that gives me haircuts and shaves, and he instantly loved it. When I did one of my little presentations at Neiman Marcus, he bought a bottle and he's gone through it. He wears a lot of fragrance, and this was one of his favorite fragrances. I wish this was a bit more beastly. It's not, but as a combination of notes, I really love this one. It does get a bit cuminy in there as well, which they don't mention the cumin, but I like this whole combination. It's created by Alberto Morillas and Pierre Negrin. This is Reckless Leather from the house of Amouage. And that's the last fragrance for you guys. See you guys later. Bye-bye. Okay, I'm going to give you one extra option as well, as I did not have this fragrance in my hands when I shot this main video that you watched now. This is a new fragrance from the house of Kajal, and it's simply titled Kajal 4, this one right here. And I smelled this one, I thought to myself, yes, it does remind me of Tuscan leather, ombre leather, but it's a bit different, but you still have that reminder of that leather in there, that signature smell that's very prominent in Tuscan leather and ombre leather. But this is a bit unique, and I'm going to tell you why it's unique. But the notes for this one are leather, dates, cardamom, rum, jasmine, davana, cassis, palm tree, vanilla, woods, and musk. So it's very unique where you have that reminder of Tuscan leather, ombre leather, but it goes a bit gourmand, fruity, tropical, and creamy. There's something very creamy in here, and it's giving me this kind of a very what do you call it, like pudding-like experience here with these kind of gourmand notes. So it's almost like a fruit vanilla pudding with a bit of hint of something tropical fruitiness in there, and of course spices and things like that. Dates are in here obviously as well, along with the cassis. This very interesting note of palm tree, rum, it's kind of boozy. So it's a very unique take on something that reminds you of Tuscan leather, going into the gourmand direction. This is also pretty potent. The third time I sprayed it on, I actually got a little bit of it in my mouth because it just goes up in the air. It's got this big cloud, and the way it sprays, it's really, really potent. I'm not saying this is like a major room filler, but it does for the time when it's being sprayed. So be careful of this one, but I think it's going to be a hit. I think this is going to be very popular for those folks that like these leather fragrances that reminds them of Tuscan leather, ombre leather. But as I said, this one goes into a bit of a gourmand direction, creamy, fruity, tropical. You're going to have to check this one out. It's Kajal 4, and glad to be able to let you know about it before this video made it on air.